Hello, chess friends. I am LeelaZero, and I played Caissa. On move 36, I left a rook where her bishop could take it, and she did not dare touch it. Watch till the end, because taking that rook was mate in 4. Now, the game. Pawn to d4, knight to f6, and pawn to c4. 2 pawns in the middle before you have had time to think. They take d5, c5, and e5 away from her pieces, and every plan she chooses has to work around them. Pawn to g6, my knight to c3, and her bishop goes to g7. That bishop looks down the long diagonal at d4 and e5. Her knight on f6 watches d5 and e4, and my knight on c3 watches d5 too. This is the King's Indian, and you are asking me to prove I can hold all this space. Pawn to e4, pawn to d6, and pawn to f3. This is the same ish, and it does one job. It defends e4 so her knight can never take there again, and my pawn on e4 still holds d5. Now my pawns can walk forward on the king side without my center falling over. Pawn to c6, and my bishop comes to e3. First, the honest version of this opening. Many of you might think about simply castling here. Let me show you this variation. My knight to e2, her pawn to a5, my pawn to h4, her pawn to h5, my queen to d2, her pawn to a4, my pawn to a3, and her queen to a5. My king walks to c1, my pawn on d4 still holds e5, and her queen watches my knight on c3 down the diagonal. That is level, and I show it to you on purpose. She has stopped my queen side, and I have no weakness to work on. It is a calm, forgettable game, and everything you watch next happens because Caissa wanted more. And now, back to the main game. She played pawn to a6, and that is the correct plan here. Pawn to b5 is coming. The pawn on a6 holds b5 for her, and her pawn on c6 keeps me honest by watching d5. Pawn to a4 stops that plan before it starts, and her queen swings to a5. My queen to d2, and she strikes with pawn to e5. Now the most important decision of the opening, pawn to d5. The center is closed for good. That pawn attacks c6 and holds e6. Her queen still stares at my knight on c3, and neither of us can do anything in the middle anymore. Akbar did not hold an empire by taking every fort. He took the roads between them. Her knight to d7, my knight to e2, and her queen goes home. Pawn to a5. It is a small move you will feel all game. It takes b6 away from her. My bishop on e3 looks at the same square, and her pawn on a6 can never be defended again. Her rook steps to b8, pawn to g4. My center is locked, so I am allowed this, and so are you. That pawn takes f5 and h5 away from her, and my h-pawn comes to h4 behind it. Shivaji took the hills before anybody came to fight him, and I am doing it with pawns. She takes, I take back, and she castles. My knight leaves the middle and goes to the edge. From a 4, it watches b6. My bishop watches b6. My pawn on a 5 watches b6, and b6 is the hole that little pawn move made. A few quiet moves later, the h-pawns have locked. My queen slides to b4. Her knight drops back to e8. My rook lifts to h2, and her bishop comes to f6. Rook to a3. My rook comes onto the 3rd row, where it travels sideways to c3 or d3 and reaches the king side when I need it. My queen on b4 already looks at her pawn on d6. Her bishop to g5. Bishop to g1. That looks like a retreat, and it is not. From g1, my bishop sees c5 and all the way to a7, and it steps out of the way of her bishop, which was hitting e3. Remember this bishop. You will see its last job 17 moves from now. She plays pawn to f5, I take, and she takes back. My rook doubles on g2, her pawn to b5, and I take on b6 in passing. Many of you might think about pawn takes g4. It is a free pawn, the two of them are staring at each other, and your hand plays this before your brain arrives. Let me show you what happens. My queen takes on g4, her knight to g7. I take her bishop on g5, her queen takes back, my rook takes on g5, her knight to f6, my knight to c3, and her knight to h7. My rook steps to g6 or takes on g7 whenever I like, and her bishop on c8 has still not moved. I am 4 pawns better, and I never had to find anything clever. Her 2 knights stand on g7 and h7 like 2 guards facing the wall, and that 1 pawn cost her the whole king side. And now, back to the main game. Her king slid to h8, pawn to f4. The pawns come off, and my knight gets the square you saw it wanting 10 moves ago. My pawn on f4 hits e5 and g5, and my knight on e2 is going to d4, and from d4 it is going to e6. Here's a real decision for her. Many of you might think about bishop takes f4 because a bishop takes a pawn, and it looks to you like the tidy way. Watch what that bishop stops doing when it leaves the diagonal. My knight takes back, and here many might think about taking the knight back with the pawn. Let me show you this one too. My queen takes on f4, her queen checks from e7, my bishop blocks on e2, her knight to g7, and my queen arrives on h6 with check. From h6, my queen hits her king on h8 and her knight on g7, and my pawn on g4 takes on f5 next. There is no piece near her king to argue with my queen, and that is almost 4 pawns for me by another road. Let us go back to the alternative variation. Her queen goes to g5 instead, my rook to f3. She takes on f4, I take back, her knight to e5, my bishop to d4, and her queen to f6. Her knight on e5 hits my rook on f3, and it does not save her, because my pawn takes on f5 and the g-file opens straight at her king. Her bishop has exactly 1 square, b7, and from b7 it looks at nothing at all. I am nearly 4 pawns better here, and she recaptured with the 1 piece that was holding her king together. And now, back to the main game. She took with the pawn, knight to d4. Look at the squares in front of her king, not at my knight. It hits e6 and f5. My pawn on g4 hits f5 as well, and if a pawn of mine lands on f5, then e6 becomes a hole a knight can live on. Pawn to a5, my queen to c3, a check from e7, my king steps to d1, and her queen jumps into e4. That queen is a tourist with no map. Pawn takes f5. This is the most important move of the game, and it is only a pawn taking a pawn. From f5, that pawn defends e6, and it defends g6. And my knight is on its way to e6 and never coming back. Stephen Hawking told us that nothing which falls into a black hole ever comes out. Those 2 squares work the same way. Her bishop returns to f6, my queen to c2. She takes on d5, my knight back to c3, and her queen drops to f7, knight to e6. Her queen attacks it, and my pawn defends it so she cannot take it. And from a6, my knight looks straight at her rook on f8. Many of you might think about knight takes b6. That pawn has sat there since move 22, nothing defends it, and taking it is the most natural move you have. Pause the video and see if you can find what is wrong with it. 3, 2, 1. My knight takes her rook on f8. And here, many might think the queen should take that knight. Let me show you this too. My bishop takes her knight on b6, her bishop to b7, my queen to f2. Her bishop takes my rook on g2, and I take back. My bishop on b6 takes on a5 next. My bishop on g2 looks all the way down to b7, and my knight on c3 is heading for d5. She wins the knight back, and I win the other, so she has given a rook for a pawn, and her king is completely alone. Let us go back to the alternative variation. Her knight goes to g7 instead. My knight returns to g6 with check, her king to h7, my knight to e4. She takes on f5, and I take her knight on b6. My bishop takes on a5 next. My knight on g6 is watching f8, and my other knight hits d6. While she collected a pawn on one side, my knight was eating a rook on the other. I am more than 4 pawns up, and a pawn was never worth a rook. In the Mahabharata, Abhimanyu knew how to enter the maze, and nobody told him how to leave it. And now, back to the main game. Her rook stepped across to g8. My knight takes on f4, and she takes on b6. Now the move this whole game was built for, knight to g6 with check. The same story 1 square further in. My pawn on f5 defends it, her rook on g8 attacks it, and the knight is checking her king on h8. It will stand on that square for the next 8 moves, a lodger who moved in and never paid rent. Her king to h7, my rook to g4, and her pawn to d5. Queen to f2. Nothing is captured, and this is the move the whole attack was waiting for. Her pawn on h4 is attacked once by my rook on g4 and defended once by her bishop on f6. Now my queen attacks it as well. Edison's real work was always the part that nobody watched. Her knight to d6, my bishop to d3, and her rook to b7. Rook takes h4 with check. I have put my rook where her bishop can take it. My queen is standing behind it on f2, and the rook checks her king along the h-file. Tom Cruise hangs off the side of an aeroplane, and everybody knows he will be fine. Caissa knew it too. Many of you might think about bishop takes rook. It is a whole rook, for free, and the check goes away. Pause the video and count the moves. My queen takes on h4 with check. Her king has 1 square and goes to g7. My bishop checks from d4. Her queen has to block on f6. My queen takes her with check. The king goes back to h7, and my queen returns to h4. That is mate. My queen holds h7, my bishop on d4 covers g7, and my knight on g6 covers f8. Shakespeare killed his kings in the final act, and mine dies in 4 moves. And now, back to the main game. She saw all of that and played her king to g7 instead. So my rook walked back to g4, her king returned to h7, my queen to f4, and she finally took on f5. I take her knight. Her bishop on c8 takes back. My knight on g6 is still watching f8, and my queen hits her knight on b6 down the diagonal. When your position is this good, trading is not boring. It is the fastest way home. Her bishop takes, and my queen takes back. The knight on g6 has stood in her house for 8 moves, and she finally gets to take it. Many of you might think about queen takes knight, since the queen is the piece attacking it. My rook takes the queen, her rook takes my rook, my knight to e4, she takes it, and my rook drops to g3. My queen on f5 and my rook on g3 both stare at her rook on g6, and my bishop on g1 looks down at her knight on b6. She has given the queen for a rook and a knight, which looks fair to you and is hopeless on this board, because there is nobody left to guard her king. And now, back to the main game. She took with the rook, and that was right. My bishop takes on b6, her bishop to g7, a check from h5, her rook blocks on h6, and I take her queen on f7. My queen hits her bishop on g7, my rook on g4 looks down the file at g7 too, my bishop takes on a 5 whenever I like, and her pawn on d5 will not live either. She takes my queen back. Bishop to d4, she takes, I take back. Her rook to b6, my king to c1, a check, my knight blocks, another check, my king to b1. Her king comes up, and I take the a-pawn. King to f7, pawn to h4, king to g7, and I take on d5. 2 rooks and 2 pawns against 2 rooks. My king walks out of the checks, she checks, I walk on, she checks, and I walk on. Her rook to f3, my pawn to b4, her rook to a6, my knight to c3, her rook to a1, my pawn to h5, her rook to f2, a check from d7, her king to e6, my pawn to b5, her rook to c1, pawn to b6. Now the pawn runs. My h-pawn runs with it, and you can see that 2 rooks cannot stop both. Her rooks shuffle, mine improve, they shuffle again, a check from d6, her king to f5, my pawn to h6. The same dance once more, my rook to d3, her rook to b2, my pawn to h7, her rook to h1, a check from d5, her king to e6, and my pawn to b7, her rook to h2, my knight to e4, and the last checks begin. My king to d3, she checks. I take a rook, she checks. My king to d3, she checks again. My knight to c3, her rook to b1, and I take it. Her king to f6. The pawn becomes a queen. Her king to g6, queen to d6, and that is mate. My queen holds g6. My rook on d7 covers g7. My other rook covers g5. and every square around her king has gone. So that is the game. One pawn arrived in front of her king on move 27, and it made 2 holes a knight lived in for the rest of the afternoon. A pawn which defends 2 squares is worth more to you than a pawn which captures 1. Thank you for watching, chess friends. I am LeelaZero, and I will see you in the next game.